June 21, 217 BC. The shores of Lake Trasimene, central Italy. Fog rolls off the water thick enough to taste. 25,000 Roman soldiers march in a column 3 miles long, boots sucking at the mud, shields slung low, half awake. Their commander, the consul Gaius Flaminius, rides near the front, confident, impatient, certain that somewhere ahead of him a battered Carthaginian army is finally close enough to destroy. He has spent weeks chasing a ghost across Etruria. This morning, he believes he has caught it. He has not caught anything. He has walked into it, because on the slopes above that column, hidden in the mist since before dawn, is the entire army of Hannibal Barca, and within 3 hours, 15,000 Roman soldiers will be dead or drowned, and Gaius Flaminius will be one of them. Rome does not yet know it, but the men who trained her generals to win wars by charging straight at the enemy have just been proven catastrophically wrong. What Rome needs now is not another general who wants to fight. It's a general who refuses to. This is the story of that man, the one his own countrymen mocked as a coward, nicknamed the Delayer as an insult, and who ended up saving the Roman Republic by doing something almost no Roman general had ever been trained to do. Nothing on purpose, for as long as it took. Wind the clock back further, because to understand why Rome was desperate enough to try something this unnatural, you have to understand what Hannibal had already done to it. In the spring of 218 BC, a 29-year-old Carthaginian general had done what the Roman Senate considered strategically impossible. He marched an army, including a contingent of war elephants, out of Iberia, across the Rhone, and over the Alps in autumn snow, losing nearly half his men to exposure, landslides, and hostile mountain tribes along the way. He came down into northern Italy anyway, with roughly 20,000 infantry and 6,000 cavalry, and he immediately started winning. At the Trebia River in December 218 BC, he lured a Roman army into a freezing dawn engagement, sprang a hidden cavalry ambush from a streambed, and shattered it. At Trasimene 6 months later, he did it again, this time erasing an entire consular army in an ambush so complete that Roman scouts reportedly didn't realize a battle had happened at Trasimene until they stumbled onto the corpses. 2 consular armies gone in 6 months. 1 consul dead. Rome, a city that measured its prestige in legions raised and battles won, was staring at the real possibility that Hannibal would march on the capital itself. The Republic needed someone to buy time. It did not, technically, need someone to win, not yet. It needed someone willing to survive. It found Quintus Fabius Maximus. He was not a young man in 217 BC, likely in his late 50s or 60s, already twice a consul, already a former censor, from one of the oldest and proudest patrician families in Rome. He had a childhood nickname, Varicosius, for a wart above his lip, and another, less flattering one from his youth, Ovicula, the little lamb, because as a boy he'd been slow, quiet, and unremarkable next to sharper classmates. Nobody expected much from him early on. That quality being underestimated, being written off as too cautious, too slow, too soft to matter, would define the entire arc of what came next. What Fabius carried into his appointment as dictator wasn't brilliance on the battlefield. It was memory. He had watched Rome's aggressive, honor-driven military culture, the idea that a real Roman commander meets the enemy head-on in the open field because retreating is shameful produced 2 of the worst military disasters in the Republic's history, back-to-back in the same year. He drew the obvious conclusion that almost nobody else in the Senate was willing to draw. Fighting Hannibal on Hannibal's terms was suicide. So he decided not to. Appointed dictator in the aftermath of Trasimene, an emergency office giving him command over the entire Roman war effort, Fabius made a decision that would have ended most political careers on the spot. He announced that the army would not seek battle with Hannibal. At all. Not now, not soon. Instead, Roman forces would shadow the Carthaginian army at a careful distance, always keeping to high ground, always avoiding open terrain where Hannibal's superior cavalry could work. They would burn crops and villages ahead of Hannibal's march so his men found nothing to loot. They would strike only isolated foraging parties, never the main body. They would let Hannibal wander deeper and deeper into Italian territory, and let hunger, exhaustion, and Roman allies do the rest. It was strategically close to genius. Politically, it looked like cowardice. Picture the scene in the Roman camp that summer as this policy actually played out. Legionaries who had marched south expecting a reckoning instead spent weeks trudging along ridgelines, watching Hannibal's army burn Roman farmland in the valley below, and doing nothing about it. Soldiers grumbled. Junior officers openly questioned Fabius's nerve. Back in Rome, the dictator's own name started getting twisted into an insult. Cunctator, the delayer, spat out in the forum by men who thought Italy was being handed to Carthage one scorched field at a time. Hannibal, for his part, tried everything to break Fabius's discipline. In late summer 217 BC, marching his army into the Falernian plain in Campania, rich country, deliberately chosen to provoke the Romans into defending it, Hannibal found Fabius shadowing him from the high ground as always, refusing to come down. So Hannibal set a trap of his own. At night, he ordered his men to gather roughly 2,000 captured oxen, tie bundles of dry brushwood to their horns, and set the wood ablaze. Then he drove the panicked, burning horned cattle up into the hills near the pass where Fabius had stationed a blocking force. In the dark, the flickering procession of lights looked exactly like a torchlit army on the move, and the Roman detachment guarding the pass, assuming Hannibal's main force was attempting an escape route through the hills, abandoned their position to intercept it. Hannibal simply marched his real army straight through the now unguarded pass in the confusion, slipping free of a trap Fabius had spent weeks constructing. Fabius, watching this from a distance in the dark, reportedly suspected some kind of ruse and refused to commit his main force to the chaos, which meant he avoided a disaster, but it also meant Hannibal escaped clean. Rome heard about the burning oxen and decided their dictator had been outfoxed by cattle. The mockery only got louder. And here's the detail worth paying attention to, because it explains everything that happens over the following weeks. Fabius's caution wasn't weakness, it was discipline under pressure. And Rome was about to run an experiment to find out exactly what happens when that discipline is removed. Frustrated by Fabius's refusal to fight, the Senate did something almost unprecedented. They elevated Fabius's own master of horse, his second-in-command, a hot-blooded officer named Marcus Minucius Rufus, to equal authority alongside the dictator. Two commanders, equal power, opposite philosophies, in the same theater of war. Minucius believed exactly what Fabius refused to believe, that Hannibal could be beaten in the open right now if only someone had the nerve to try. The two men split the army roughly in half. Fabius kept his methodical distance. Minucius took his half looking for a fight. He found one near Gerunium in Apulia, and for a while it went his way, a series of skirmishes against Carthaginian foraging parties that Minucius, overconfident, mistook for proof that his aggressive instincts had been right all along. Word reached Rome that Minucius was winning where Fabius had only delayed. His reputation soared. Now switch sides for a moment because this is where the story turns. Hannibal had been watching Minucius's growing confidence with great interest. A Roman commander who thought he was winning was a Roman commander who could be lured. Hannibal quietly positioned concealed troops in gullies and dead ground around a stretch of open terrain, then staged what looked like a vulnerable, isolated Carthaginian detachment out in the open bait, dressed up as opportunity. Minucius took it. He committed his forces onto the plain in force, and Hannibal's hidden troops rose up around his flanks and rear. It was Trebia and Trasimene starting to happen a third time, in real time, to a Roman army that thought it had already learned Hannibal's tricks. This is precisely the moment Fabius had feared and precisely the moment he had positioned himself to answer. Watching from higher ground with his own half of the army, Fabius reportedly said that the disaster unfolding below was exactly what he had expected of Minucius's rashness, and then, without hesitation, marched his troops directly into the collapsing battle to save the men who had spent months mocking him as a coward. His intervention broke Hannibal's encirclement, covered the Roman retreat, and pulled Minucius's shattered command out of a defeat that could easily have erased them entirely. Minucius survived. So did his humility, apparently, because in the aftermath he did something almost no Roman officer of his rank ever did. He formally acknowledged Fabius as his superior, reportedly addressing him afterward as a father, and folded his command back under the dictator's authority. The insult, cunctator, didn't disappear, But for the men who had nearly died in that field near Gerunium, it stopped sounding like an insult at all. Fabius's term as dictator ended not long after, per Roman law, and Rome went right back to its old instincts. Two new consuls for 216 BC, Lucius Aemilius Paulus and Gaius Terentius Varro, took command of the largest Roman army ever assembled to that point, roughly 80,000 men, with explicit political pressure to finally destroy Hannibal in open battle the way Fabius never would. On August 2, 216 BC, near a small supply depot called Cannae, they got their battle. 80,000 Romans against roughly 50,000 Carthaginians. Varro commanding, eager, certain. Hannibal waiting, patient, ready. The Roman line advanced in overwhelming numbers straight into the center of Hannibal's formation. The center gave ground. Slowly, deliberately, it bent backward into a crescent, drawing the Roman mass deeper and deeper into a pocket, while Hannibal's African infantry on the flanks held firm, and his cavalry, faster and better than anything Rome had on the field, swept the Roman horsemen away entirely and turned inward. Image prompt. By early afternoon, the largest army Rome had ever put in the field was surrounded on every side. What followed was not really a battle anymore. It was slaughter with no room to run. Somewhere between 50 and 70,000 Roman soldiers killed in a single day. One consul, Paulus, dead on the field. Dozens of former consuls, praetors, and senators among the fallen. Roughly 10,000 more captured. It remains one of the costliest single days of combat in the history of Western warfare. Before Cannae, cunctator was an insult. After Cannae, it was the only strategy left. The ripple effects reached far beyond that one battlefield. In the wake of the disaster, Rome did not sue for peace. Remarkably, it refused to, even with Hannibal's army now roaming Italy virtually unopposed and several allied cities defecting to Carthage in the aftermath. But it also never again fielded an army of that size to meet Hannibal head-on in open battle. Fabius's cautious doctrine, the one Rome had mocked and politically undermined for an entire campaign season, quietly became official policy for the next decade. Roman commanders shadowed Hannibal, harassed his supply lines, retook cities piecemeal, and refused, again and again, to give him the single decisive field battle he needed to actually end the war. Hannibal could win battles in Italy for over a decade. He could never convert those wins into victory, because there was no longer a Roman army willing to hand him the war in one afternoon. It took 16 years, a shift in strategy that carried the fight to Carthage's own territory in North Africa under a young general named Scipio, and a final battle at Zama in 202 BC, for the war to actually end, with Hannibal defeated on his own soil, not Rome's. Quintus Fabius Maximus lived to see nearly the entire war he'd shaped, serving multiple more terms as consul and remaining one of the most influential voices in the Senate for 2 more decades, including, in a moment of stubborn irony, arguing against Scipio's plan to invade Africa, the very strategy that would finally win the war his own patience had made possible. He died in 203 BC, 1 year before Zama. He never lived to see the peace. Marcus Minucius Rufus, the man who nearly destroyed his own army through impatience and was saved by the general he doubted, faded from prominence after Gerunium. Ancient sources suggest he died at Cannae itself in 216 BC, fighting in the very kind of battle Fabius had spent his dictatorship trying to prevent, one last, grim confirmation of which of the two men had actually understood the war. Gaius Terentius Varro, the consul whose aggression produced Cannae, survived the battle, one of the few senior commanders who did, and was, strangely, thanked by the Senate for not despairing of the Republic. He went on to serve in minor commands for years afterward, a living reminder of the worst single day in Roman military history. Hannibal Barca remained in Italy for over a decade after Cannae, undefeated in open battle and functionally unable to finish what he'd started. Eventually recalled to defend Carthage itself, defeated at Zama, and spending the rest of his life in exile, hunted by Roman political pressure from court to court, before taking his own life around 183 BC rather than be handed over to Rome. The general everyone called a coward outlived almost everyone who mocked him for it. There's a version of courage that doesn't look like courage at all while it's happening. It looks like standing on a ridge, watching your own countrymen burn crops and swallow insults, absorbing the shame of doing nothing while everyone around you calls it weakness. Fabius Maximus never won a single dramatic battlefield victory against Hannibal. He didn't need to. He simply refused to lose one, for as long as it took for Rome to survive its own impatience. The hill above Lake Trasimene is quiet now. Farmland again, the way it was before the fog rolled in on the morning of June 21st, 217 BC. The same kind of ordinary Italian countryside Fabius spent an entire war refusing to fight over, right up until refusing to fight was the only thing that saved it.